are building a Webflow website, stuff like that. However, the big finding is that on the left, on the test of learning, the active learners actually scored higher, about 15%, than the passive learning. So we love this feeling of we think we're learning by watching stuff, but we actually learn better by doing stuff. So that's kind of the thesis here. And my idea is that Webflow pushes us to be doers or have a bias to action. Um, when I first left the Navy and I was getting started with development and those sorts of things, I didn't start with Webflow. I started in Unity building games, and I was actually able to build this game that I launched on the Apple App Store called Fan Surfer. It's just an endless runner where when you press a button, your character goes up, and when you let go of the button, the character goes down. You try to dodge these birds. And I was able to actually build a full-fledged game, but I soon ran into problems like even creating an end game screen where like, okay, the character died. Now we need to transition to a different state, and doing all this state management stuff was really hard. Um, Another course I took was CS50, and that was very Python based. And I was able to build a web app with that, but I didn't quite know like how to host it and running into all these development environment issues that tutorials don't often cover. So I was inspired by a great Canadian as well for this bias to action. You guys might know a guy named Wayne Gretzky. He says you miss 100% of the shots that you don't take. So Webflow forces us to take a lot of shots, in my opinion. And the way it does that is by having a paid workspace plan. Now, I don't remember what it was when I signed up, but for me, the most enabling thing of Webflow was being able to publish something live to the web via webflow.io, and having unlimited staging sites. So I got started. I had learned enough. I had gone through all the Webflow University material. I had developed a couple of my own projects and finally was like, well, let me see if I can make an income with this. So I ended up on Upwork. And the way I started winning a ton of contracts on Upwork was just by taking 1 to 2 hours to build out a like prototype of the site somebody was looking for. I basically would filter by Webflow only and also by job posts that already had existing Figma designs. So I didn't have to do any design. And my proposal would be, hey, I spent 2 hours like mocking up a project for you. Here it is. If you want to hire me, I think this will take so many more hours and here's my rate. And I was charging really low rates. And that's how I was able to just like start getting a lot of practice on Upwork. So again, the thesis here is that Webflow encourages learning in a unique way, and that's project-based and freelancer-oriented learning. My question for you is, how did you get started in Webflow? What was your start like? I'd love for somebody to be able to share kind of what your journey was like. I know some people do come from developer backgrounds already and that sort of thing. I may call on somebody if I don't get any participation, because I think if I just move on from this, it'll be a little bit awkward. But let's see, or even in the chat and YouTube, I think Jeremy's going to throw some stuff. So yeah, I would love to hear from somebody. Go ahead, Patrick.
So I got started in Webflow it was like a trial by fire a little bit. I had like built a couple of websites with Adobe Muse at the time. And then someone reached out to me and they were like, oh, hey, like I heard you doing websites now. Can you do some work on my website? And they had like another developer had already like built it out. And I was like, yeah, sure. Like, what's the worst that could happen? And then it was like Webflow. And I was like, I had to learn like really fast how to figure it out because it was like a quick turnaround time for a project. But then, yeah, it was like miles ahead of where Muse was at the time. And I was like, all right, I guess this is like, this is what I'm doing now. And then all my projects from that point forward were in Webflow.
Yeah, I like that, what you said. I guess this is what I'm doing now. That's kind of what happened to me. It's just like, I think I got like looped in via Webflow University. I just loved their content. It was so good. And so, yeah, Adobe Muse is not something I've ever heard of, by the way.
So this was in like 2015. So I've been in Webflow for, I think this will be like 9 years this year. So almost 10 years. And I built like a couple websites in Muse, and I was a graphic designer beforehand. So like I was doing mockups in like Photoshop and Illustrator and stuff. And then, yeah, I actually developed some websites for people with Adobe Muse. And it was like, I can't even describe it. It was like, it was fun. It was just, it was challenging. But you know what? I came up with websites at the end of it. They weren't great websites. I'll never show them to anybody. Like my secret shame.
That's
But then,
awesome.
yeah, then Webflow came out, and even Webflow, like Webflow so long ago was like very different than it is now. But it was still like all right, this makes sense, right? Like, and it was like, okay, I can actually use this tool. I'm not like confused kind of thing, right? Even though I was so new to it.
Yeah, when I was a kid, I tried to use Dreamweaver to make a website for my dad, and I couldn't get it across the finish line. It was too hard.
Yeah. So now Muse is like just the visual part of Dreamweaver, but then like with a level of obfuscation because they wanted to emulate like some more of the drag and drop features from like Wix was gaining some traction at the time as like, oh, you can build a website and by yourself with, and it was just absolute divs position all over the damn place. It
Yeah,
was
nice. Yeah, go ahead, Penny. Thanks, Patrick.
Um, so I started learning in Dreamweaver as well, but back in 2005. And I had been building sites for a while. I was in a group where a lot of people were using Adobe Business Catalyst, which was also sunsetted at the same time as Muse. And so a lot of people were trying to figure out what to go to and were doing research, and somebody suggested Webflow. I kept on doing what I was doing for a while, but eventually I went to Webflow and thought, "Oh, this is so much easier than typing code by hand," that I just stayed.
Nice, thanks. Anybody else? Otherwise, I'll go ahead and move on to the next section here. That's a big fat no. All right. Thanks, Penny and Patrick. All right. So Patrick had said, like, okay, I guess this is what I'm doing now. And there's no like really point where that you say that, but it just kind of happens over time, at least for me. So now we're in this section of going for it. And you quickly are building like these paid projects and you realize Webflow can't do everything. And you also realize your client doesn't really care. So for me, my very first job was customizing a bricks job board template. I think this was like 2 or 3 years ago, and some Twitter influencer was saying like, "Oh, if you build a job board template, you can make $1 million a month or whatever." And so this was really popular, and I saw this post on Upwork. And the very first thing that this client wanted was active filtering of the job posts. So the Webflow CMS is very well structured in that you can link to different categories, but as we know, you can't filter it dynamically on the page. For that, you need something like JavaScript. And I took this job actually not fully understanding what this client probably wanted. Again, my rates were pretty rock bottom, and I was hopeful that I could get a solution and pass it up to him with some sort of solution already working. I hadn't like fully taken on the contract at the time, but at the time, FinSuite had this offering of CMS library. This was before attributes, and that client had also come across JetBoost, and so I really just like this is my first Webflow job, and already I'm being exposed to what is a script tag, what is an immediately invoked function. I was just copy pasting this. I didn't know what a code editor was. I didn't know, ChatGPT didn't exist at the time. So here I am on my first Webflow project, and I have to integrate JavaScript solutions to win this contract. Um, so the other things, like I just started realizing this as project went on by project, that the project ended up going well. I delivered, and with the use of CMS library and was able to win that contract. Um, but every project I was doing, I found I had to learn more fundamentals of web that Webflow didn't support natively out of the box. And so this is just a slider. Everybody knows building sliders in Webflow can be difficult. So we reach for libraries like Splide or Swiper. And doing something as small as styling the active pagination dot required me to start understanding how CSS works. And we can see here that we're looking for a class of splide underscore underscore pagination underscore underscore page, and then a combo class of is active on that. And so this kind of got me started using Inspector and learning more about the fundamentals of web through Webflow. Another client problem is, hey, this video looks grainy. I found clients, like anytime I was using the Webflow background video component, my clients would say that it looks kind of grainy. And as a web developer, I didn't know that I had to know a ton of stuff about video codecs, but here I was like installing Handbrake on my computer and taking hours to just re-encode videos. Well, it turns out we can host videos in other places and we can drop in HTML inside of a code embed. So you might, get something like this that I have here. And if you want to connect it to CMS, you can do all that. So it just is, I'm realizing that as I'm working on every project, I'm getting exposed more and more to these web dev fundamentals, and I actually don't even know it at the time. Um, the other thing that came out was Logic, and I remember this being a huge release for Webflow, like a lot of fanfare around it. We've since discovered it's one of like the Webflow-ish releases, which is unfortunate because I think Logic could be like pretty freaking cool if it just had a little bit more love folded into it. But here I am making a post request to Airtable, and you can see like on the right here, the URL is api.airtable.com. Like I'm there's already like a subdomain. Like, what is a subdomain? How is this not going to airtable.com? What is an API? I don't even know what that is. And then I'm writing JSON here. Because somebody in a Webflow forum told me how to write JSON. So I'm, again, just starting to get exposed to network requests with this, which is another fundamental of web development. So Johann Wolfgang von Goethe is a famous German writer, and he said, in the realm of ideas, everything depends on enthusiasm. In the real world, all rests on perseverance. So since I was taking these Figma designs that were already done and throwing them into Webflow, my client didn't care, and I couldn't like really create the designs for Webflow. I think if you're a very strong designer, that's maybe an advantage you have, is that you know, like, oh, Webflow doesn't support this, I'm not going to put that in. But I didn't have that option as a freelancer. And I found that 100% of the websites that I worked on needed some sort of additional HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So I'm retargeting Webflow's H1 to your gentle or not so gentle introduction to HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And now I'd like to pose another question to the group to either share about your first paid Webflow project and what that was like, or maybe even give me another example of like where web development fundamentals are lurking in Webflow that you might not expect. So the CMS is another one I wanted to mention. That's basically a database. And to be able to like abstract away a database and provide that immediate connection between the backend and the front end, which Webflow does really seamlessly, like helped me get started so much sooner than if I had to actually like spin up a Postgres instance and figure out how to, create a client and connect it to my front end and all that stuff. So this is the question I'm posing. Would love to hear from the group. I'll call on somebody at random because that's what I do. If nobody goes ahead and offers themselves up, camera on people are at higher risk. So sorry, guys. Appreciate that. Yeah, Patrick, go ahead.
So so my first Webflow project was actually like pretty basic, but like it was still like a new experience to me because it was a new platform. But actually the second one I jumped on, which was right after, because like they referred me to somebody and they were like, oh, they were doing like a meal plan delivery service kind of thing, and they had like this really great looking website. Again, like a developer had built it out, and they needed like some holiday kind of updates and stuff like that. And I got into the project, and so like my first project was like bare bones Webflow, and then the second one right away I go into the homepage and like nothing was rendered. It was all like there's an embed and oh, it'll look like on the live site. And I was like, what the hell did this developer do? And then like I load up the live site and I see like there's Instagram feeds that they're like triggering from the API. There's automatic additions from like the CMS. And this is, and we're talking like 8 years ago. This is like before a lot of like the more public like ways to do this or were around. And I was like, wow, like this developer is like really using like all of their know-how, and they're using like Webflow as like an easy front end for the client to make changes after the fact. But that was like I definitely get what you're saying, where it's like there's you can make such a big leap so fast when you're willing to like add those extra like HTML and CSS and JavaScript and really look at what those integrations can be. And it actually like it scared the crap out of me because I was terrified to make changes because I was going into it, I didn't know what any of that was. I was barely building functional like HTML sites because I was coming from a drag and drop platform, and so it was a huge shock where it was like your maybe not so gentle introduction to HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. I definitely feel that.
Yeah, giving me strong Elf site vibes. I definitely
Yeah,
stumbled on the Elf site landing page a lot when I was getting started
yeah.
in Webflow. They've created a pretty good product, and yeah, I was a curious person, so I found myself like really interested in, well, how does this FinSuite CMS filter thing work? And starting to learn about like what client-side JavaScript is and what it can do and all that. So thanks for sharing. Chime, you raised your hand.
Yeah, mine was complete pure accident actually, because I was on a project just as a pure designer. We're gonna hire a developer. Um, and then so I went out, designed everything, and made like pretty crazy interactions in After Effects and all that stuff. And the developer was way too expensive, and it was a bit too late actually. Like, so we designed all this stuff, expecting to bring on like a developer that could like do all this stuff. And yeah, it was out of the client's budget, and it was a really cool project, and I really wanted to do the interactions that still happened. And I knew about like, oh, there's this thing like Webflow. I knew about it, kind of thing. And I've been playing with like GSAP for like 3 or 4 years. Made like loads of code pens, just like individual things essentially though. And I was like, you know what? I don't want to compromise on the interactions. So that was my first kind of like, I said, you know what? I'll give it a shot. I'll just jump in. Let me see if I can build it essentially. And luckily, I think ChatGPT had just come out as well at the time. So I'd make the best thing I could in CodePen for these interactions, and then pull that into, I think it was Code Sandbox at the time. I don't use that anymore, but that was kind of like a mix of introducing me into like more proper JavaScript as well, alongside Webflow, like hooking that up. And I think I watched a bunch of your tutorials on like linking all that together as well. So yeah, it was pure accident, but also like it showed me like the I needed to know JavaScript from like the start essentially, if you want to do like cool stuff with it essentially. Yeah.
That's interesting. You kind of just skipped over. For me, there was a long learning point where I was using Webflow interactions a lot, and then realizing that they're just writing JavaScript and doing that, and like, oh, now we have this tool called GSAP that can, it's a little bit more mature and it can do things pretty easily, but you have to understand the basics. Love that idea of you just like creating a ton of code pens and playing around in that. Yeah, I find the CodePen community to be like, rather than Webflow Showcase now, it's easier for me to search through CodePens for something, either inspiration for content or to find an interaction that's already made or similar to one that comes in the design. So that's pretty cool how you just kind of hopped right into it without any reservation.
Yeah, I think because I had a bit of experience in like GSAP already, and I try to use the Webflow interactions, and like when you control like doing staggers and stuff is just way too like tedious to do in the interactions model. So I was like, I'm just gonna do it in GSAP. It'll be just way quicker, and it's just like literally not even like it's not even like another line. It's in the same line essentially. Just yeah.
Yeah,
So
for me, there was a lot of learning too. In like, I was doing some interactions in Webflow and some in GSAP, and then like
mm,
figuring out like when does certain JavaScript fire and that sort of thing. So it was painful, but it was incredibly informative. So yeah, the not so gentle interaction. Cool. Thanks for sharing. That was awesome. Uh, Anyone else want to talk about a first paid Webflow project or where web fundamentals are lurking in Webflow? Nope, we're moving on. That's a big fat no. All right. So the last sort of section here is on honing your craft. So actually, John Mayer was kind of inspiring. I don't know if you guys follow him at all, but he talks a lot about learning guitar and his approach, and it involves a ton of practice, like 8 hours a day. When he just kind of sat down at one point and decided, like, okay, I'm going to commit to this, and I'm going to be a great guitar player. And he had this quote: "I've tried to stop playing the guitar and start playing music on the guitar." So here, the idea is, at least my approach is, I'm not really here to learn Webflow. I'm here to learn web development. And Webflow is the tool that I use to get web development tasks done. And with that in mind, I actually signed up for a coding bootcamp called Hack Reactor. And now this is kind of my competitive advantage. This is my, like, I guess my little dirty little secret that not everybody knows. I feel like I did a 3-month coding boot camp. I paused all of my freelancer projects, and it was paid for by the VA. It's normally like a $20,000 3-month course, but the VA took care of it all because they're like really focused on putting veterans into different jobs, and this is one of the ones that existed. So um, looking at this, you can see I got obsessed with my GitHub commit graph. This was from 2023, which was kind of the timing after I took this coding bootcamp. I made this, like, these are still pinned on my GitHub right now. Animate text was like a wrapper around GSAP. I was basically trying to figure out how can I create this, a plugin for Webflow similar to FinSuite CMS library or similar to JetBoost. You see FanSurfer there's the endless runner game. I would be afraid to open these repos up. I have 235 repositories. Maybe that's too many. I don't know, but I really like just spinning up little projects and testing things out. And then Judging Joe's, this was my final project. It was like a Yelp clone for that was my final project for Hack Reactor. And I don't really have many pictures of me just sitting on the couch on my laptop working for 8 to 10 hours a day. It was a pretty intensive course, but I was traveling over here, so you can see that. And then this is kind of like a typical day. We'd have 2 or 3 Zoom lessons with the class. And then it was very React focused. So we were building everything in React, but I did have also an unfair advantage for Hack Reactor because I had that 6 months in Webflow. I understood that if I had a paid plan then too. So what I could do is I could write the HTML and CSS in Webflow and export that style sheet. And then I would just pop the style sheet over. So a lot of my classmates like couldn't figure out the basics of Flexbox and the CSS layouts, but I felt like I had this superpower because I could build. People would always look at my apps and be like, oh, that's so beautiful. And it really wasn't compared to what a lot of people are building in Webflow. But this was kind of, I started realizing those synergies of how code and Webflow are doing the same thing. And at the end of my Hack Reactor course, I found Phone Prefix by FinSuite just randomly. I always was inspecting other people's Made in Webflow pages. And FinSuite on their Made in Webflow page has a phone prefix challenge where they're looking for JavaScript developers. So this is how FinSuite has chosen to hire JavaScript developers: is you build a form input that pulls phone prefixes from an API, and then you build a dropdown that has to be keyboard navigable and just has a lot of accessibility features that aren't available out of the box from a Webflow dropdown. So if you want to get an idea of how I apply for jobs or make proposals, like this was a .webflow.io thing that I spun up and sent to them. So these are like all the competitive advantages kind of stacking on top of each other to get me a job with FinSuite. And we can see here that I still don't really understand how to use corner radius as a designer. This was maybe 2 years ago. That was probably too much border radius. But yeah, I wanted to share that. And then as I was getting more projects to write client-side JavaScript, I was also making tutorials and stuff on that in my Webflow YouTube. So I love this video dissecting how Webflow makes a website, which is basically where I make a basic website on Replit, and then I publish a blank Webflow project and compare the two, say like, what is Webflow actually doing when we press the publish button? I had this lesson I wish I had on coding as a Webflow dev. So I started like really getting into making more JavaScript content. And the whole purpose of that was just like, there's this idea that we want to learn from people who are maybe 6 months to a year ahead of us in our journey, rather than from somebody who's a complete expert. And it can be hard to actually make that content if you're not an expert and feel a little, a lot of that imposter syndrome. So to help you get over that, I provided you with a comic here. This is a Dilbert comic I just pulled from somewhere. I'll let you read it on yourself, but basically what it's getting at is that a lot of times when experts are trying to explain stuff, they don't understand where their audience is, or they don't know what their audience doesn't know. And so that's why I think we need more people teaching and explaining web fundamental projects to Webflow developers. If anything is an example, then you can just hop over to my Discord, where I get questions every day on just the most random stuff. Patrick has been kind enough to help me out in there big time. But just like there's just no shortage of people wanting to learn more web development stuff in Webflow. So Discord's a place that you can go and get Webflow help for free if you want. And I think this is close to my last slide, but this idea of guru versus guide. Another competitive advantage I've had is that I've been a part of organizations that are very learning focused, and they push learning down to the lowest level. And that was this Outdoor Adventures Club that I was in college, and the Navy. So in Outdoor Adventures, the bottom left picture there is me leading a group of kids on a 3-day backpacking trip up San Gorgonio Mountain in Los Angeles. And like, I'm just a kid. I had maybe 1 to 2 years experience, and I did have some EMT training, but that's it. Like all of a sudden I'm responsible for 12 kids surviving in the wilderness and teaching them how to, sleep in a tent and this kind of thing. So that was like a really revealing experience for me of how you can be a guide for a person. And then also the Navy, um, the Navy has very young people doing very, like, I guess, serious, depending on how you look at it, jobs. Like, I don't driving a submarine through the Strait of Malacca as when I was 25 years old was a pretty crazy experience. And then just teaching the people who were coming in below me, because every 2 years you rotate to a new job in the Navy, so there's always fresh bodies coming in. And that was just another unique experience to help me gain confidence of teaching stuff that I don't really know. I do know it better than the person 6 months to a year behind me, but if I had been doing this for 10, 20 years and I'm trying to teach somebody who's just getting started, it's going to be really difficult to do. So that's why I really encourage teaching in some respect. You don't have to start a YouTube channel. You don't have to, you can choose where you want to do it, whether you want to be active on Twitter or in a forum, just something that is helping you solve problems that other people have, because I found that as one of the quickest ways to level up my own skills. So it's really a selfish motivator. That's why my free Discord exists, because I get content ideas from it. I level up and I grow faster. So that really concludes this section. I will finish us off with one more question, which is, can you recall a time when you really felt like you leveled up your skills? Doesn't have to be development, can be design or anything like that, but would love to hear from one or two folks. And then that will be the conclusion of this little presentation. Yeah, Patrick, please.
I guess I can kick it off again here. I made like such a huge leap in my Webflow development when I started leading development at like an agency. So like right when COVID started, most people were like moving away from full-time work, but I actually like moved into a full-time role just because like the agency, like I ended up contacting this agency. It was a connection through my wife, and she was working there already. Their developer dropped out, and they were like, okay, we need someone to start right away. And I was like, cool. I'd done a bunch of Webflow sites up until that point, but then it was like I got put on, basically every sales call, every developer focus call, every website call, and it was like, all right, like this needs to happen. How can we make it happen? And that shifted from websites to like, oh, maybe a dynamic form, to, oh, maybe dynamic multi-page action that can happen, or some tasks need to be automated in the background. And it was like so much JavaScript had to be learned so quickly because clients just kept coming in. And then it turned into building web applications, and now like some kinds of software with Webflow is kind of like the face of it. But that was like a huge turning point for me when I started to realize like how far I can really take Webflow as like a platform. And even though like I left that role, I feel like I've kept the momentum up in terms of like how much I've been learning and like how much I'm willing to take on. So it's like, and I tell all my clients this whenever they get in a call with me, like the first call is basically it's a little bit of like a running joke, but it's almost like whenever if something needs to get done, right? Like I'll never say no to anything. I think truly, anything that you can think of, we can figure out a way to make it work, right? And like that attitude combined with like that experience has just really, really allowed me to propel, what I could accomplish with the platforms that I use, right? So
Nice. Yeah, I'm hearing two things. The first is like having a leadership role or some sort of accountability mechanism where like you're kind of in a hot seat. It does raise the stakes a bit. And for me, like Upwork really provided that, or just being in charge of a team. So you have to kind of be careful about it, or just jump into it. But having that hot seat can really spur you to improve fast, I found.
Yeah. And
then
you even bring up examples too, where it's like, you're talking about leading campers or you're being in leadership or important roles in the Navy, right? And it's like, yeah, like you have to perform because you're in the spot, right? And like for me, that pressure is like it's okay. It's like taxing over a long period of time. Obviously, like that's kind of how most kind of important rules work. But it was definitely an accelerator for learning and my skill set, because it had to increase quickly, right?
Yeah, one of the topics I ran into when I was researching this was desirable difficulty level, and how do we like, you don't want something to be too difficult, and I definitely run into that same issue you said of it's so hard to say no to, a client if they want something, like, okay, we'll figure it out. And if that happens enough times, you start to realize like, okay, like I'm a little bit here there's a lot of uncertainty around this project right now, but I've had that happen before and I've worked through it. So having that experience is definitely valuable. So yeah, thanks for sharing that. I think I can work that into this talk somehow if this ends up being the one that I use.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I just want to add to that as well. Like it's when you jump into a situation like that and it improves your skills so much, and you just look back and you're like, you don't realize what you're actually capable of. Because I think if you, a lot of times you're waiting for that perfect moment to get better at something, right? But when you just jump in without knowing that whether you're going to do it or not, and it works out, it gives you this confidence of like what you said, just tackle these challenges even if you don't know. And the more you jump into these, the more you jump into these like challenges that you don't know about, but you figure out, the confidence builds. I just wanted to like add on to that. 100% agree with what you guys said just then.
Yeah. So I guess the challenge is knowing like what is the like being able to recognize when something is just too difficult, because I feel like there definitely is that does exist. Like something I should not take on versus what, this is uncertain to me, but I can still what is it? Take this on, take on this challenge. So yeah, you got to have an appetite for risk, I guess. Maybe that's it at the end of the day. Yeah. Jeremy, what's up?
Yeah, I was kind of thinking of something that was on my brain, which was when I had to like create an auth system, and I kind of dove into Firebase because it was like the system that I was using before wasn't secure enough, and I just kind of found that out, and it was like, oops, and you got to fix it immediately. And so jumping into like learning Firebase and hooking it up with Webflow and stuff like that. And then I think that was one of the turning points for me to like really get into feeling like, oh, okay, I kind of like this this area of, more database and back end stuff. And it was something that just had to happen in order to keep a project going. Otherwise, data was at risk. So
Man, that's pretty crazy. You just had to learn how to integrate Firebase into a project on the at the drop of a hat. That's something you wanna find out in scoping meetings, but yeah, you don't always know up front. There's a lot of like tech stack discussion too, and so it's easy to fall into this idea of the best tool is the tool that you know, or the tool that you are going to know, not the not the one that some YouTuber tells you to use, I guess. That's what I would say there. Well, that's cool. Anybody else? All right. There's an awkward pause, and that. Oh, Patrick's in.
Oh, I was gonna say there was when we were all talking, I sent a message in the chat here on the side, but that I think that term that you want to refer to is like about as far as you think you can go, but maybe it's like a step further. I'm gonna call that like the ego ceiling from now on. It's like how far my confidence will take me +1, and that's
Nice.
probably a step too far. Trying to implement Firebase last minute, I could definitely see hitting my ego ceiling there. But I definitely get so caught up in like the newest, the hottest tech stack and stuff, and I end up like pulling it into my scoping meetings. But then I end up forcing myself to learn it because it's the one I commit to using, right?
Yeah. I love that, the ego ceiling. We generated new content today, so that
Absolutely.
that could be a
Oh,
good thing for.
Penny said the marginal ego as well.
Yeah. I just realized I was in my DMs with Jeremy and not in the group chat, so I saw. Yes, Virat, it was a horse mask. So I'll answer your question there. The submarine was the USS Louisville, and in the States, Louisville is famous for their racetrack. God, what's it called? Churchill Downs. And yeah, we have our big. So that was kind of like our mascot or like team thing, was wearing these horse masks as a joke. So yeah. Well, yeah, we're trademarking the ego ceiling, or at least Patrick is, but I might steal it non-covertly. If I do steal it, you know where it happened. You were here for it. So look out for Patrick's new book called The Ego Ceiling. I'll think of the H2 here in a bit. But let me finish off with a little plug. If JavaScript is interesting for you, or you want to get better at it and learn how to level up your skills, then Patreon is the place to go. And I've been working on building this out. I cover different things, a lot of GSAP stuff. That's my favorite. I have a whole JavaScript course in there. There's a free roadmap to learn Webflow. So if you're watching this on YouTube, be sure to go check that out. It's got, like, in my opinion, the structure of the way you should tackle courses, and it's not all just like super linear, like course number 1, course number 2, course number 3. I break it up into modules, and I also encourage you to engage with certain accounts on Twitter and YouTube, because I feel like a big part of my Webflow journey has been doing events like this and interacting with all the awesome people that we have in the Webflow community. And it's one of our competitive advantages, in my opinion, is our small community, in that we still all can know each other. I don't know. I saw that Free Code Camp had a like intro to Webflow video the other day, and it had, over 50,000 views. And so I'm like thinking, well, this is good for everybody. Rising tide lifts all boats. But at what point is the community going to become unmanageable? Because if you look at the JavaScript community, it's quite a bit larger than our Webflow community, I would say. And there's like these superstars. And if I feel like if I was getting started in coding and I just started with JavaScript, I would feel lost at sea. So don't get lost at sea. Follow the chart. Web Bae has the way in his Patreon. Boom. That's it. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Would love some feedback on the talk, because I'm thinking of doing something like this at Webflow Conf. Yeah, I don't know. Do you have Penny? Do you have an outro, or Jeremy? Otherwise, I can keep chattering away and we can just kind of BS for the next 5-10 minutes. But yeah.
I do have an outro, but I'd love if anybody else has anything else to contribute to the discussion, or if other people are already learning from Web Bae. I'd love to hear what what your experience has been. If you had not known much about JavaScript beforehand, working with Keegan, what's your experience been? Not to put anybody on the spot.
Oh, I was actually gonna pull it back to something you said earlier in the talk, Keegan, too, where you mentioned that you don't necessarily want to learn from an expert. You kind of want to learn from someone who's like 6 months to like maybe like a year ahead of where you are. And I didn't know that you were like so new to like the web development world and JavaScript world when I found you initially, because I was like, oh, all like your videos are like so well put together and everything like that. And I just kind of expected right off the bat for you to be an expert. So I can definitely see how, like, when you're talking about like JavaScript course in your Patreon or something, like people can find it like very intimidating. But like I personally, I've gone through like a lot of the JavaScript courses that you have like on YouTube and also in Patreon. And even, and I say this, I think I said it to you too, but I say this all the time. I'm like, even though you might think that he's moving quickly, it's like the concepts that you're actually showcasing are just something like, they're so fundamental to getting started and understanding like the core of the language. Like, we're not talking about higher level concepts that you end up learning like way at the end of your journey. It's like you can learn this and you can use this and you can get started right now, and then you back that up by having like clonables and projects and like all that reinforcement type learning that you talked about at the beginning of the course. And it's like these all showcase like how quickly you can get started with what I'm talking to you about right now. And I just think, even though it might seem intimidating, and I even like on LinkedIn you made the post about like how you start with Git right away, and I'm like, yeah, people have said like that's intimidating, but I'm like, it's so useful because you just get right into the tools you're actually using and you can get started right away. And I don't know, I just think it's I really enjoy Keegan's JavaScript courses and all the JavaScript course on his Patreon, the Web Bae Patreon there. So short little
You heard it,
plug
everyone.
/ review. Yeah.
Testimonial from Patrick Corsetti, the man. Thank you for that.
I knew there was some.
That's a really nice comment. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I just
Anybody
wanted to
else?
I started doing I've been wanting to do like JavaScript. I used to hate coding because my degree was design and code essentially, and I hated the code pilot. I absolutely, I just hand that off to the dev in my team and be like, you do it essentially, you know. And then in like 2020, I started playing because I wanted to interact with all like the animations that I was making. I kind of like ventured into GSAP, and like GSAP was very similar to After Effects, but just code essentially. And then the more I realized all the cool stuff that I was seeing, it was like all the cool stuff on the web that people were doing was with code, and I was like, I'm gonna have to learn code regardless, you know. And I'd hop on a lot of courses on YouTube that teach dev are not really for like a creative mind, if that makes sense. It's pure like I feel like most regular devs have like a certain way of like digesting information essentially. Me and like other creative friends, like I just doesn't sink in. And the only two, essentially, yeah, only like two things have like worked is like one's your course that I've started taking, and GSAP essentially. I think your course, I do think it's fast, but it's not too fast. I think one of the things that I think a lot of YouTube courses and like other courses in general, they go through a lot of technical boring stuff at the start, and you just don't see what it's adding. But I think your courses, you do a little bit, and then you do a project, like a little small project kind of thing, and then you see you just see the effect of whatever you're coding essentially. And I think that's a great way of learning. I know like everyone learns differently, but yeah, it's working for me essentially. Yeah.
Thanks, Chimme. That's another testimonial from me right there. The only thing that worked for me was the course and GSAP. So thank you to just kind of respond to that. You know, I tried to learn coding, I think 2 or 3 times before I really settled into a way where I figured out how I could learn it better or learn it more. I tried the Harvard CS50 course, which was really good. And all this stuff kind of compounds on each other and helps you learn this stuff more. But I was always looking for project-based learning courses. The other one was another Python course on Udemy, called like 100 Days of Code or something like that. And every day you were building a project. So when I went to build this one, I was like, well, that's the main thing is I want to make sure that at the end of the day, we're building stuff in Webflow that's, you know, inspired by real client stuff that I've done, so that you're learning useful skills from the bat. And then the other piece of that, in Patrick's point, is that you're learning industry standard tools that everybody else is using, so you can figure out where to get help and that sort of thing. So, and then the other point Chimme made is that these tutorials go over a lot of stuff. Is like the development environment and setting up your code editor and all this stuff is so variable between people. It can be really challenging. So I try to keep all my settings stock and not change anything, because for years that's what frustrated me the most about coding was I would run into some error in console and I didn't know how to fix it. And I think ChatGPT is a really good tool to help us get around those now. But yeah, I struggled with that for a long time. A person who I do think is doing an awesome job learning coding is Jeff, who's here. He's like basically he's taken the bread and butter. His bread and butter is I take Rive stuff and I put it into Webflow, which requires some coding knowledge I've seen from what he shared. So yeah, there's in my feeling, there's a lot of room for us to kind of find stuff and market ourselves as that individual, I guess. So thanks. And Virat too. I have to mention Virat. He's just a wizard. He's amazing.
I was gonna say just quickly, are you saying you don't want to see like my NeoVim coding Webflow tutorials? Like, is that that's a step too far, right?
I want to make memes about you. No, you'll have your audience too, man. You'll like if there's, I'm sure there's plenty of people out there who want to be good at NeoVim, but it's not me.
I'm gonna convince Virat. Me and
Yeah.
Virat. I'm gonna convert Virat to Neovim for backend development there.
Yeah,
I have to say, I
do.
really
Yeah.
enjoy the tests as well in your courses, Keegan, because I don't know, there's something about a bit of the gamification of it with the testing and the way it works. And that was kind of an interesting thing that I haven't experienced with any courses. And I think for me, I find that if you want to go and do things with Webflow past what it can do, you kind of have to be in that kind of coding realm of doing things a little bit. And by just trying and doing things like you, I started with FinSuite's CMS library before attributes existed. So that kind of aspect of things, and then just kind of progressively went. And then I had one of those courses that was where like you do the whole thing and it's this big project, and at the end of it you can't even remember what you did. Like it's like, yes, you built something, this specific thing, and then it's like, great, I have a whole system I can go from scratch, but like I don't know how to do this again.
I feel you there. Yeah, I built like a real estate management system through some course on Udemy, and the tech stack was like just this obscure tech stack. I just didn't know what I even learned from that, and I would get so lost. Oh my god! Thanks. The testing actually, I ripped that off from Hack Reactor. Their learning modules were structured a lot like that, like basically like a to-do list of you need to pass these tests to submit your homework essentially. And so it's kind of like layering in that accountability and, as you said, gamification. So that was a really important piece for me to launch with the course. It was a big struggle to figure out how to do it. And I was hoping I could use ChatGPT a lot more to just write the test for me, but it turned out I had to learn the testing library, unfortunately, which is kind of how it turns out with everything I've found. So, yeah.
Now let's figure out how we can implement some tests before your Webflow site allows you to publish.
Yeah, I was listening to Syntax podcast the other day. If you guys listen to that, and they were talking about testing libraries, and I guess I don't know. I think it's Chai or something. Some of these web testing, what you can do is you can basically like press record and click around on your app or your web page, and it will write your tests for you. I had no idea that these tools even existed. So I'm kind of interested because I never really, I don't spend that much time writing tests for like a lot of my production stuff because I'm just a terrible programmer and I'm the only one in the code base anyways. I think tests can really help if you have a lot of people in there. Okay, Virat said Cypress and Playwright. Yeah, so I'd love to explore that even a little bit deeper and see if there's some sort of opportunity for like building maybe even a little app around testing your Webflow site, like yeah, some sort of end-to-end tests. I don't know what that looks like, but it's a good idea.
Well, I think especially when people are still learning and trying to figure out how they're doing things to be able to test your site and make sure it's working correctly is probably a good idea. And of course, being the one who actually does none of this stuff, I'm assuming that that's actually what you're talking about when you're talking about testing, as opposed to
Yes.
my university course tests that are crazy.
Yeah, no, you're spot on.
Anyway, we are at an hour, and thank you so much, Keegan, for taking us through what you're hoping might turn into a Webflow talk. I think it's great so far, and I think you will definitely get a lot of support when you let us know on Twitter that you've applied, and you're going to get a lot of folks giving you big thumbs up to tell the Webflow folks that they
Yeah,
should have you
thanks.
there.
A struggle I had with my talk last year was it was very like tutorial how-to kind of content, which with the slideshow, it was just pretty dry and I had to rush through it, I felt like. So I think Joe did a really good job of like telling a story and just like entertaining versus instructing. So this year I want my submission to be something more along those lines. So yeah, if there were points of the slideshow that really stuck out to you as interesting story beats or something like that, please let me know and I'll try to get it there, I guess.
Excellent. Great. Well, thank you, and thanks to everybody who showed up, both on YouTube. Sorry for the glitchy bits at the beginning, but I think we turned out okay in the end. It obviously what we know now is that Jeremy is a much better runner of streams than I am. It's a lot of it's my country internet connections. I think that was a big part of the problem. So if you have not already joined our mailing list, please go to nocodenorth.com and sign up for our mailing list. We send out a weekly newsletter to let you know what's coming up. Follow us on YouTube, Twitter/X, Facebook, LinkedIn, where we post once in a while. During the summer, we'll be sort of cooling it on our regular programming, but we'll be having our Friday hangouts every Friday at 12. So just come shoot the breeze, talk about what's going on with you. What are you working on? No pressure, and just a fun way to wrap up the week. And the Northern Showcase, our workshops like this, and our panel discussions will return in September. And otherwise, we'll wish you all a great weekend and see you around. Bye.